Hello.
Victory. Our story begins with victory. The evil empire had slipped away into the shadows. The New Republic had taken Coruscant. The Sith were nothing but marks in a history book, and the Jedi just as close to such absolution. Luke Skywalker was asleep. It had been a long few years since he had joined this fight, and now he could finally rest. There was an added pressure that he did not communicate though. The celebrations on Endor were wondrous, but they could not last forever. The reality of the weight Yoda placed on his shoulders was overbearing. He would forever be stuck with the burden of being the last Jedi. Those were Yoda's words. Generations of failure now resided on a 23-year-old's back. Luke was strong, so he wouldn't be deterred by it, but still, there was a genuine burden under it all. He slept peacefully tonight though. Thanks to Mon Mothma and Admiral Akbar, he had himself a nice private little quarters inside the now legendary ship, Home 1. Soon, Skywalker would be off to find relics of the past, and search through Imperial storage rooms and vaults to find the secrets of the Jedi Order. It was widely known that Sidious sought to cover the legends of the Jedi from the galaxy. By doing it, he either destroyed their history or completely hid it from everyone so that he could study it. Luke had dreamed about his father's death a number of times since Endor, though this did not hurt him. He was at peace with it, knowing that his father was protected. As he dreamed, he foresaw failure, folly, and weakness. These things do come with time, as do all changes, but the odds were stacked against him. Luke had conquered the last of the Sith, something an army of 10,000 Jedi could not do. The burden was now his to find the survivors and see if they had any interest in rejoining the Jedi Order. Luke knew the answer, unfortunately, that none of them would want to join the sect that completely abandoned them. Regardless of Luke's own thoughts about these events, he twisted and turned in his sleep. He dreamt of nothing, but it didn't feel that way. The Force was swelling and swarming around him, so much so that he felt like he couldn't breathe. This eventually worked its way up to his neck, and he grabbed his throat, jolting from his sleep. He hadn't experienced a Force choke, but this was close enough. His saber found itself to his hand, and he ignited it. But when he looked around the room, no one could be seen. Luke extinguished it and tossed it away, as he placed his back gently back on the bed. He closed his eyes and searched deep into the netherworld of the Force. It was something he understood so little about. Yoda taught him so much, but so little in a short amount of time. A sacrifice he took by abandoning Dagobah. Skywalker tried to connect with whatever was out there. The galaxy was so far and wide that the darkness he felt surely had to be something else, perhaps just his imagination. There was no doubt that facing Sidious left a permanent scar in his heart. Just being around someone so evil, so purely hurtful and devious, pained his soul. It was another one of his burdens to bear, and Luke needed to walk past it. He assumed that this dream came from the manifestation of darkness that surrounded him after escaping the second Death Star. He breathed shallowly, changing his pace as to match his internal meditation. Luke was pushing himself back to sleep when all of a sudden a voice sprung into life.
Luke.
Skywalker's eyes shot open. He did not recognize the voice. It wasn't Yoda, nor Anakin, nor Obi-Wan. So who could it be? Luke turned his head, still not seeing anyone, but sensing someone or something close to him. He got to his feet and walked towards the door, opening the sliding mechanism slightly to see that no one was near. The vessel was in night mode anyways, so the lights across the entire cruiser were dimmed, leaving Luke, who confusedly closed the door. He turned the lights on and saw nothing, forcing him to turn them back off and sit on his bed. Luke called out for anyone, but was left with nothing. So just as he had before, he laid back down and focused on his meditative breathing. But again, it was interrupted.
Luke, trust in your heart.
This forced young Skywalker to spring to life, but in the ignition and the hum of his lightsaber, a calm and focused voice spoke to him again.
Luke, you do not know me, nor have you learned of me, but listen with your heart and trust with your soul. I am your father's original master, Qui-Gon Jinn. I wish to give you a message. Of it, you can choose your own path. The Force has returned to balance, but the burden of the Jedi Order does not need to be your life goal. True mastery of the light can be found in any singular path. The one you place before your path is one that will unnecessarily challenge you. The trammel of eons past does not have to be yours to carry. Trust in the Force, young Skywalker. It will guide you further than any code.
Before Luke could send a question to the Jedi Master, he was gone. Somehow, in ways that he couldn't even put to words, he could sense that Qui-Gon Jinn was gone. He quickly grabbed his journal and recited the quote from memory and thought on it, before replaying the same sleep exercise and finally returning to his rest. Luke was happy to be back in the actual rest of sleep. When the morning came around, he reread the quote, confirming that it wasn't a dream, and he considered it. Instead of committing to his new rituals, which included a morning meditation and a training in lightsaber techniques, he went to the bridge of the ship. His dear sister and his best friend had engaged and married on Endor, following the celebration and Yub-Nub. But much had to be completed. Mon Mothma stationed Han and Leia instead of Home 1 because she believed that they needed to be at Coruscant until the Republic could confirm that it was a safe location. Mothma was inside of another vessel. Luke stayed inside the flagship because he hadn't found a new location to investigate. There were a team of rebels putting together a list for him, and they hadn't finished it yet. Regardless, Skywalker walked into the main bridge, where his sister stood silently over Coruscant. She spoke to him before he could even say a word, telling him that Coruscant was hurting like the rest of the galaxy. It was a shame that they had to be the ones to fix this mess. Luke nodded his head, before she asked why he was here instead of his training quarters. He then told her about the vision or the interaction he had the night before. Leia knew about his seeing of Anakin, Ben, and Yoda on Endor, so this wasn't outside of her realm of expectations for her brother. Luke admitted his own frustrations with this, and Leia understood them. She wouldn't push her brother to doing anything in particular, but she had to admit she had her own justifiable fears with restarting the Republic. Mon Mothma was an incredible woman, but even Leia believed that they needed to have a fresh look at governance. She understood that rebel volunteers would go back home, and the Republic wouldn't have the finances to run a stable military. And that didn't even include the myriad of problems that would come with the former Imperial Senate that would rush to assume control over their territories. Leia had seen the greed growing up, and knew that despite Mothma's attempts, it would return. She placed her hand on Luke's shoulder and told him that the gift he understood, more than herself, would be a guide to him. The Jedi Ghost may have given him the right advice. The burden of the Jedi didn't need to be his. Luke smiled weakly, nodding his head, and thanking his dear sister for her kindness and her words of inspiration. He asked if there was anything else he could do for her, but Leia just shook her head with a smile. The following few days would include more meditation from Luke. He'd be given his list of Imperial storage facilities, but wouldn't leave immediately. Skywalker had tragically been guilted into continuing the Jedi lineage. It was a burden beyond anything else, because maybe the Jedi didn't need to continue. There was so much he needed to learn, on top of the fact that he didn't have a teacher. He had done so much leading up until this point. Luke wasn't going to act like any task was too big for him. He destroyed the Death Star during his first flight inside of an X-Wing. He could do this. But there was also the fact that there was so much disfavor towards the Jedi. Not only would he be dedicating his entire life to a sect that the galaxy pretty much loathed, but he'd also be trying to rebuild something that abandoned the people of every world. Yoda and Ben were his teachers, and he respected them as such, but they were fundamentally wrong with placing the burden on him to save something they hid from for 20 years. If they truly cared, then they should have burdened themselves with saving the Order. Luke could bring something new to the galaxy. His goals in life should not be built around the fundamentals of a religion that his own instructors didn't care enough to resurrect. This became the swinging on his shoulders, one opinion to the other, from left to right. He could see the issue with being burdened by it, but he could also be the legacy to tie the past to the future. He could make what was wrong right, and correct where his masters had failed. But even through youthful optimism, which was at the heart of Luke's soul, there was something else. His life wasn't one to be wasted. Someday, he would grow old, and did he want to reminisce about having to serve a thankless sect? One that could absolutely go wrong at any moment? Luke didn't come to the conclusion inside the Rebel flagship. Instead, he took Red 5 and his trusted droid R2-D2 and traveled across the stars. He believed that he would get a better idea of his own feelings once he conquered some of these stashes that Sidious hid around the galaxy. The irony about that is, unlike his father, at this current moment in his life, he wasn't craving adventure. Skywalker had experienced a desire to be a hero, which led to losing his hand on Bespin. He was grounded now. He had conquered the fight with his father, the Empire, and the Sith. This could be his chance to make something everlasting. Skywalker's time at these stashes further confirmed his beliefs. The Jedi Code wasn't really what he needed. It wasn't at all what saved him on the second Death Star. What saved him was his courage, his ability to save those committed to the dark side and allow his attachments to be a cornerstone of his achievements. None of what happened would have been completed without his attachments, something the Order of Old forbade. Yoda and Ben warned Luke prior to his arrival at the superstation, and these warnings weren't really used because he found ways around them. Luke encountered Imperial troopers, some of which he was able to save through compassion. He faced civilians still loyal to the dead regime and offered them a guiding heart. Skywalker came across the hopeless and filled their souls with sunlight. This was his gift, not one belonging to any religious sect, but something truly attainable, something that could also be instructed to others around him. As he continued his journeys, he came across a few Force sensitives. Some were near Imperial bunkers and hideouts. Others were within the same systems, not on the same planet. Luke was able to speak to these people. From his endeavors with them, he learned their own interpretations of the Force, and this is where the crucial shift in Luke's direction came. He had dedicated himself to a full year of his life to at least give the Jedi path a try. He had completed maybe a third of it by this point, and he wasn't feeling drawn towards it much at all. But what he did feel drawn towards was a priestess from one of the outlying systems. It was Shili or Shola, he couldn't really remember the name off the top of his head. This priestess spoke about her own people and their grasp on the Force itself. The Togruta weren't the most present people in the galaxy, but they were a religious group, one that had found alliance with the Jedi at one point or another. Though this ancient woman did not speak of the Jedi, she spoke of Luke's heart, having sensed who he was underneath his belief that he had to aspire to be something he was not. She too mentioned that the trammels of Jedi failures were not his to carry. The priestess encouraged him to walk with her, which he did with honor. They would speak for days. This came with light meditation, but nothing too difficult. She wasn't going to train Skywalker. Her days of instruction were far beyond her. She was an elder woman. She assisted with gifts of knowledge, not regimental training. The knowledge she gave to Luke was to trust the Force. He was powerful, but she also suggested that he not be afraid of his own power. Who came before him did not define him. His blood was tainted by something evil, but she enforced that some things were stronger than blood. With this, she tapped her cane lightly against his chest and smiled softly. Luke would bow before her and then continue on his journey. More than anything, his encounter with the Togruta priestess left him more confused. She was the direct split in the road. After meeting her, he could decide that the Jedi route was for him, or he could pursue a path that included his own creation. He wasn't sure, but the priestess and Yoda were polar opposites, ones that defined directions Luke could take. Skywalker's grand adventure took him further from this world and towards more inner rim systems. He no longer followed the direction of the maps, he simply adventured. Luke wanted to understand the common person now. Relics were great for knowledge, but those were especially useful for a fully formed sect. This was not that. Skywalker knew that the key to being present for those who actually needed help was to listen. He could be all high and mighty just like everyone else who joined the New Republic, but what he chose to do was understand people. This wasn't national treasure, he wasn't looking to steal documents. These were people in need, not vessels of information that survived thousands of years, a purge, and would survive another 1,000 more. So instead of identifying himself with the Jedi Order, he remained steadfast. He remained neutral, and he just went out to understand people. Luke sat in casinos, cantinas, bars, restaurants. He sat with the poor. Skywalker slowly but surely, instead of being enveloped by artifacts of what he considered to be a dead religion, became the guide he needed to be. People didn't come to him for advice, because he didn't have all that much to give. He just gave people what they needed, the time to speak. So much of the deliberations on Coruscant were lost in the nonsense of talking over each other. It was a tiring facade, one that never got anything done, and one that never saw resolution help the people who mattered. Skywalker wasn't here as a representative, but he listened, and he would communicate everything to his sister a galaxy away so that real change could be made. In these days, especially near poorer planets and systems, Luke was able to use his weapons some, pirates, scum, criminals, and so forth would attack him. No one had anything greater than a blaster, so Luke was able to quickly disarm them from their weapons, and sometimes their limbs, if need be. But he was a very talented lightsaber user, and he displayed his strength when in combat with these aggressors, but he never started anything with any of them. He constantly tried to stop situations from bubbling over. Diplomacy wasn't his strong suit, but very quickly he learned how to negotiate with people and try to find a middle ground, which more times than not never came. Skywalker through this also ran into another character that would influence him greatly. Dar Rekka was his name, and he was a member of the Keldor species. The elder man, probably around 300 or so Keldor years old, was a former navigator for his people. He stopped shortly after the Clone Wars ended, so that he could be an aid to others who faced the wrath of the Imperial machine. Dar Rekka would influence Luke to make more self-focused choices. Dar had seen the Jedi in their prime and in their fall, and per his perspective, Luke was acting like a Jedi. He told Skywalker that people didn't need a martyr. They needed representation. They needed someone to stand with them. Luke was doing that, but this was a big galaxy, so how long until others could join him? The Jedi could never accomplish what he wanted to complete, because their reputation truly preceded them. So what was Luke going to do about it? Skywalker grinned at this question, realizing that everything had come together. Maybe it wasn't what he imagined, but in every way he was experiencing a full and true grasp on how to live his life without being a Jedi. The Force had guided him into helping people, which he accomplished with relative ease. This is what he wanted, but there was still so much more to be done. The Jedi way wouldn't permit him to succeed. It would hinder his ability to help. Dar Rekka knew it didn't make sense, seeing Luke's youth, but he promised him that if he found others who wanted to help others, like he, then he could truly be the guide people needed. Sadly, Rekka, despite being a Keldor, was not highly Force-attuned. He knew of the Force, but he didn't believe himself worthy of Luke's time, or position with this new sect. Plus, Rekka didn't want to push Skywalker in any direction by being around him. He believed that alongside the will of the Force, it was his duty to be another informational stop for Skywalker. The priestess was the first, Dar Rekka was the second. It was time for Luke to actually create his new sect. This actually burdened him more than anything else. He had been around the galaxy, time was getting to him. He wore a thick facial hair, one that was still relatively patchy. He would shave it off and return to his family, who resided on Chandrila, for Ben Solo's second birthday. Luke had been in contact, but over the communication didn't equate to in-person connection. Lando, Han, Leia, and Chewie were all gathered around. It was like Endor all over again, but the wear and tear could be seen on each of his friends. Life after the rebellion included stresses, and while they were all doing well, it was a long road to success. This alleviated him, because partly Luke felt like he was falling behind. The truth is though, everyone goes at their own pace. There is no need for competition. Luke was understanding that he didn't need to pressure himself as painfully as he had. Through a few conversations with his friends, Lando would direct his friend out towards Vandor at Fort Ypsum. He spoke of an old assassin from the Clone Wars, but their work had changed greatly over the past decade or so. Luke might find some luck with her. He trusted Lando with this, and as they were talking, Han butted in, laughing about how he once beat Lando at a game of sabacc on Vandor. But Lando corrected the smooth-talking buddy because it was Han who lost, because he was still in Beckett's crew at the time, remember? Han smiled, and remembered the one time that he was played by Alden Ehrenreich, and nodded. Fair enough. At the dawn of the following morning, Luke would be off for another adventure. Ventress called Vandor home from time to time, and she was living in an abode on the planet. Her partner had passed away of a natural death, which hurt her dearly, but she found purpose serving as an overseer of the fort. There were cliffside homes, and she lived in one. Asajj wasn't quite a protector or anything, but she made sure the people didn't get too rowdy. When Luke found the woman, by Lando's description, she was seated at a sabacc table. The only way to speak to her was by joining her in the game. But truthfully, someone with a name like Skywalker was an interesting find even to her. She hadn't heard of one of them since the Republic fell. Their initial conversation was a tense back and forth. She really pushed Luke a little bit. Asajj wanted to know why he was here. Knowing Lando was a benefit, but even he owed her a shiny penny. Their conversation moved from the sabacc table to the bar, where he was suggested to buy her a drink because she wasn't going to continue this conversation without it. She wasn't going to be overly friendly with a Skywalker, let's not be ridiculous here. But why was Luke looking for her? At the bar, she would learn of his intended purpose, and she shot down some of his idealistic thoughts on the galaxy. She'd been beaten down time after time, and despite mellowing out, even after Quinlan's death, she was still on edge all the time. Luke admired her self-sustainability, but inquired if she might join him on his endeavor. Asajj believed that his path was one that was short-lived, because he truly wasn't going to go far beyond simply being burdened by the needs of others. However, she considered it solely because she wanted to know more about the fate of old Sky Guy, and whatever happened to create this blonde-haired boy. A little nosy, but not much happened at Fort Yipso anyways, so what the hell. She then got a good laugh out of the fact that he brought an X-Wing. She would allow him to fly her own ship because he foolishly didn't bring a larger one. Probably something he should have considered, but thanks to Lando's description, he honestly didn't think he'd get anywhere with Asajj. Instead of glamorizing the pursuit of helping the helpless that Luke had grown accustomed to, Asajj showed him the darkness of the galaxy. He was a moisture farmer on Tatooine, sure, but there were worse places in the galaxy. Some so close to the new government, like the Coruscant underworld. She showed Luke what the galaxy really was. There was a thick skin protecting the public from what the government truly neglected. Whether it be Republic, Empire, or New Republic, the banner didn't change the effect. It was a constant loop of something drastically different that didn't really change much for anyone. She reminded Luke that the difference between those who sat inside the Senate and those inside the underworld was their paycheck. Everyone had a voice, but only the New Republic officials could control whose voice got heard or promoted. She told him to remember that, as they moved to Outer Rim scumholes like Nal Hutta and Zygeria. All of this started to discourage young Skywalker, but that wasn't what Asajj intended. She told him to get it together and continue. She might see flaws in the naivete, but his optimism could move mountains, especially if he wasn't going to be a Jedi or a Sith. In which, she, after showing off some other scumholes, would tell Luke that she would join him in this crusade of justice, but there were some things she wanted to teach him about the Force. Unluckily for Skywalker, the information he was passing back to his sister wasn't doing a whole lot. Leia was trying to be as hopeful as possible, but truthfully she couldn't really do anything. The Republic Senate was made up of former Imperials. There were even a few senators from the Old Republic era sprinkled in there. It was disorienting, and it was also disheartening. She couldn't stop them because even though she, like her brother, had the youthful energy to compete, this was the Old Dogs Club, and it didn't belong to some young senator trying to make a difference. These senators wanted to reclaim their paychecks, lost following the dispersion that followed the Jedha incident. They were hungry, and first to go was the Alliance military. It wasn't a necessary asset in their greedy eyes, and Mothma nor Leia could give the Senate enough reason to keep it. Most of the warriors who joined the Alliance were volunteers. When the war was over, they went home. Very few remained behind, and had to be paid. They needed workers' comp, pensions, and so much more. None of that mattered to the politicians, so they were expendable. Luke and Asajj, on the other hand, found a goldmine of information by accident. While parading through the Outer Rim, they found themselves members of the Imperial Remnant. These were beaten down stormtroopers with little to fight for, serving warlords and officers who thought that they meant something. All of this went back to their desire to do something good for the greater empire that no longer existed. Skywalker and Ventress as a team cut through these Imperial bastards, especially when they fought back. Each one of them disturbed the peace of a bright future, and they paid dearly. This is where some of Asajj's lessons were adopted in real time. Luke never dove too far into the dark side, remaining a lot like Qui-Gon, but he was aggressive with his movements with a lightsaber and his use of the Force. In all of these engagements, Luke never went so far as to be even comparable to his attack on Vader within the second Death Star, though there would be a little comeuppance from their actions. Because the Imperial Remnant was harvesting midichlorians from Force users around the Outer Rim for Project Necromancer, very few knew of the true purpose. Those people included Ventress and Luke. How would they know? Because Asajj knew how desperate the Empire was, she and Luke would plant bad midichlorian transfusions into the tubes inside of one of these Imperial compounds. Asajj theorized that when the news broke of this malfunction at one of their bases, they would send a crew to gather surviving resources and survivors. These transfusions would inadvertently lead to Palpatine's death. He would die a terrible death, one turning his blood into mush and clogging every artery inside of his body. The noticeable effect for Luke and Ventress was their ranks gaining numbers. They saved quite a few prospects during this, one of which being Grogu, who was found years before a Mandalorian stumbled upon his enclave. As a note, Grogu wasn't at an Imperial compound, but accidentally stumbled upon because they got the wrong coordinates. Not all the individuals joined the New Order, but many did, which meant that they needed a home. Luckily, Ventress knew just the place. Out on the hidden world of Pabu, she directed this new sect to settle. There was no official name for the Order, but people were floating the name Skywalkers. Luke disagreed with this because of Anakin's last actions before becoming Vader. Even though he saved him on the second Death Star, that was his reasoning. He wanted to set the path with something unrelated to him, in fear that if it lived for centuries, that he would be seen as a prophet, not a man trying to do the right thing. The Nameless Force Order continued to add people to this safe and tropical location, until a true home could be found. Pressure mounted though. Citizens recognized this group as Jedi, or the New Jedi, and neither Ventress nor Luke wanted to be associated with that. So on Pabu, in the middle of the afternoon, on the same beach that Asajj tried to train Omega, Luke would be approached once more. Instead of remaining hidden like the last time, the old Jedi Master would show himself.
You have done well, Luke. Your new order continues to grow, and you have trusted the Force well. However, as you know, your journey is not complete. There is more to accomplish, more to inspire. The will of the Force is your guide. Trust it, Luke. I propose you expand your vision. What you have learned will carry the weight you need to inspire.
Young Skywalker tried to speak out to the Jedi Master, but almost in a pushy way, Qui-Gon turned around and started walking the other way, telling the young Force user,
Come on. No time to waste.
The blue apparition vanished before his eyes, and as if it were the will of the Force, Asajj peered over the rocks and told Luke to hurry up. When he got up to her location, they could see that the Senate was preparing to make a vote on their budgets. This would determine the effectiveness of the Republic in the eyes of citizens galaxy-wide. The Chancellor laid out some proposed budgets, many of which were aid packages to the people of the galaxy, but they were shot down by her peers within the Senate. Luke and Asajj would need to do something about this if they wanted to have an everlasting effect. Palpatine, and therefore Snoke, might be removed from the equation, but people would move closer towards the Imperial remnants or future First Order if the Republic could not align itself properly. Skywalker would go first, coming up with a name for the sect on the way to Coruscant, Will of the Force. It was a bit tacky, but it was what Qui-Gon said when he told Luke to start his path towards the New Order. Perhaps it was a way to memorialize the man who started this journey. To Luke, at least, it was. They were leaving Pabu with a group of 12 members. 7 of the others refused to leave Pabu, and they'd rather look after Grogu anyways. Popping Imperial settlements really helped with increasing the numbers of this new sect. Anyhow, thanks to his clearance from Leia, Luke was able to represent the galaxy on the galactic stage. Because he hadn't been chasing after relics and the dying Jedi path, he was able to connect with people, see them for who they really were, and retell their stories. Several of those systems had representation within these very chambers, so their voices should have been heard by the representatives and senators within the Senate. Instead of calling for a vote on the budget, Luke called for a brand new slate of elections, so that the people could have a chance in every sector across the galaxy to make their voices heard. They had seen the Empire, and now they were being represented by the Empire's survivors. Look at Masameda, still serving, after 30 years of loyalty to Palpatine. How deep did the chains go? They were bound to Palpatine despite being a new republic. If they wanted to fix it, they needed to herald in that change with elections on every star system. Sadly, this did mean that Leia would have to run for her own election, but no one could doubt the voice that Luke had and used. Plus, it shouldn't be all that hard for Leia to win her election anyways. Everyone knew who Skywalker was. Some saw him as a warmonger or a terrorist. Others saw him as a hero. The least people knew about Skywalker was that he destroyed the first Death Star all on his own, and he also walked into the second Death Star unprotected and defeated Palpatine and his evil apprentice in one go. They were looking at him like he was a god in some ways. But Luke confessed that he was simply a man of his own, a bringer of a new order, one that promised everything he preached, the same words preached by the New Republic. The will of the Force would not be scapegoated for political leverage. It would stand with the people, and thus, he let each of the members brought with them speak. Hours would pass by, with millions of people tuning in across the galaxy to see member after member retell their harrowing stories from their times within Imperial labor camps or remnant prisons. They would depict the struggles they faced prior to their captures and throughout Imperial rule. The longer these hearings went on, the more people outside the Senate started to get upset. They were angry that they weren't being represented fairly. They wanted a chance to actually choose their voice, not have it sprung up because they served the Imperial Senate. So much of the true power for the people was lost in Palpatine's aristocratic rule. This was their chance to truly separate themselves from the Imperial regime. Would it cost them time and credits? Yeah, but those were better served changing a flawed system than rather trying to spend around it. This would surprisingly work, because pressure amounted galaxy-wide to follow what was preached. The galactic people needed something easier to say than will of the Force, so they called them the Vizier. These were the guides of the new era. Though Luke's long day was not finished yet, they were heading down to the underworld to knock off another Imperial stronghold. Some New Republic soldiers would be guiding them. They had to travel down nearly 200 levels to find it, but these people had been here for decades, hiding. They never saw the fires of the Coruscant Civil War following Endor. However, there were new faces within their ranks. Luke and Asajj led the way down, with the other vizier maintaining their presence inside the Senate, so that they could help sway people further away from the status quo. The two leaders of the Force sect ignited their golden and emerald sabers, and marched into the darkness. When they got closer to the base, they were attacked. Luke pushed Asajj out of the way and laid his body at an uncomfortable angle to block the swing coming from a crimson saber. The figure remained masked, hiding their identity, but they were freakishly flexible. The Republic troopers moved around after Asajj told them to breach the base now. Luke and the unknown figure traded blows, with Ventress following them swiftly. Their weapons collided, bouncing off the walls and creating echoes in the darkness. Skywalker continued to press aggressively, but it was matched by his opponent's equally as aggressive assaults. The two vizier never stopped though. Their weapons continued to cascade down in hopes to squash this foe. Just beyond them, Imperial stormtroopers and rebels were at it again. Blasters fired away, clouding the entire hallway with death. The Republic troopers were more equipped, but this was an elite unit of stormtroopers. They wouldn't go quietly. Thanks to a thermal imploder though, the stormtroopers would be dispersed and slaughtered in the minutes following. Outside, where the sabers continued to shriek, Skywalker paced himself, slowing his aggressive pursuit and catching the individual by their wrist and shoving them towards the wall. Their saber slammed into it, and they tried to elbow him, but he spun around, colliding with her strike in an epic parry. Ventress kept her distance, keeping an eye on Luke's footwork and his precise strikes. She had trained him well, and needed to at least admire her own work. Luke was able to break through the opponent's lightsaber, and in a swift strike, he used the Force to shatter her mask. It was revealed that a red-headed individual had been hiding her identity down here. She was hoping to find her way back to her master, but the Imperials forbade it, ensuring that they maintained their hidden connection with Exegol without disruption. Obviously, they hadn't received word because Palpatine's death was the end of the Sith, and therefore the Sith Eternal. Mara was no true Sith. As Sidious would have likely called her, she was just a child in a mask. She'd be arrested with the other Imperial troopers, who surrendered, and returned to the New Republic prison complex. But old optimistic Luke was in full belief that he could sway her heart to the light. Not even for romantic purposes, but if he could save the evil Darth Vader, then surely he could save someone who had never felt the decency and delicacy of gentility in the light side of the Force. Despite this, Luke would receive information from Han and Chewie. Since they didn't have much to do and the Wookiees were all saved, thanks to their combined work, they went looking for a place for Luke and his new order. Well, Lando always knows a guy, and it turns out there were old Jedi ruins on another planet. It was called Radai, located in the Mid-Rim. It was uninhabited by a civilized population, and the ruins were actually pretty well maintained. It was a tropical planet like Pabu, but due to where the Jedi built it, or how they constructed it, the structures were maintained in time. As Han said, just a little paint job would make it look brand new. This would take Asajj, Luke, and the other vizier to Radai, where they would find these ruins, which were more like a preserved mausoleum. Weirdly, there were no dead bodies to account for. As they would come to learn, through information inside the archives, this temple was a perfect sanctuary, except they had stranded themselves on the planet by accident when their ship malfunctioned and crashed into the sea. They were never able to get back in contact with their peers and inform them, so they built this temple around 19,000 years ago, and as a result, they eventually learned the same technique that Qui-Gon used to pass away into the Force. This hyper-spiritual sect of the Jedi Order was unknown for about eternity. The Old Order believed they were turncoats. In reality, they got lost. This would become the home of the Will of the Force, or the Vizier, which they kind of preferred that name more. Less to say, just straight to the point, and it was well received. People across the New Republic were championing the Vizier. They were like the heroes. They were the official face of change. The Senate wanted to return to normal business as if a war didn't just happen, just like the Empire did. Instead, this religious sect rose to the challenge and forced the entire system to hold a mirror up to itself, something that would inevitably save the Republic. For years, the will of the Force would continue to grow. Light and dark would be learned, but not taught. The dark side was not to be played with, but it was given to people so that they could understand it and know why they didn't choose to use it, unless absolutely necessary. Mara Jade would eventually be turned, and that would slip away into Luke and her forming the first marriage within this religious sect. They would set the standard for other members of the rapidly growing order. Unlike the Jedi, they weren't selective. Any age and anyone could join, because anyone could be taught. It was a hefty undertaking, but it would push the group further into the future. At some point, political rivals would try and oust Leia from the Senate, but thanks to her brother being the face of a group widely loved and appreciated, he was able to help her maintain her seat. A seat that would have the most important role in stopping the rise of the Imperial Remnant and the First Order. Leia's defense bills would stop the rise of Imperial rule forever. Mara and Luke's own children would never turn to the dark side. The Sith were defeated. Instead, these children would follow in their parents' footsteps. They would learn how to help those in need from an early age, how to truly be a vizier, which people respected and adored across the stars. Darth Rekka would also join the Order. The Skywalker Organa Solo family would be big and happy. The twins would each have their roles in completely stopping the rise of the remnant, and they too, after years of stress and struggle, found their truest happiness. And that, my friends, is a pretty wholesome PP story if you ask me. Special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Special thanks to Concordia Jedi for doing the voices of Qui-Gon Jinn. Let's talk about this story. So, I really wanted to go on the basis of Qui-Gon being the inspiration in this story. I know a lot of interest is in Anakin and Luke's dynamic, but I thought it'd be more interesting / unique to have a path where Qui-Gon is the one that influences Luke. I feel like that's a relationship or a dynamic that's never really been covered much, and that's why I wanted to focus on that in this story. As for Luke, I think this path best fits him in both Legends and in canon. I think him going out to interact with people makes more sense. I feel that the Jedi put an unnecessary burden on him, that being Yoda and Ben Kenobi. That thing that we didn't worry about for 20 years? Yeah, you can deal with that. Good luck, kid. See ya. I'm going on vacation to death. Like, that's just kind of messed up in my opinion. So, I thought it'd be more interesting to have Luke kind of more conscious of that than just going out and doing it. You see it in the Battlefront 2 campaign where Luke interacts with the trooper from Inferno Squad. And I think it makes sense for Luke in this specific story to be like, actually, I'm going to just go and interact with people. I think that him becoming well-versed and well-understanding of people would be a greater help to helping the New Republic in the long run, which is a big key to this story. So, I hope you all enjoyed the story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.